The dog had been sitting there for 6 hours. Every rescuer assumed he was waiting for his dead owner. None of them thought to ask what he was waiting for. Before I continue this story, please hit subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another fascinating story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Sarah Chen had spent 2 years avoiding Highway 17. She'd transferred stations, changed her route to work, even moved to a different part of the city. Anything to not drive past mile marker 47 where her husband's car had wrapped around a guardrail and she'd been too late, too slow, too broken to save him. Now here she was, standing beside a fresh disaster on that exact stretch of road. 3 cars, 2 fatalities confirmed, and a golden retriever sitting motionless 20 feet from the worst of the wreckage. "Someone get that dog out of here," the fire chief called, "before he gets hurt." But when Sarah approached, the dog didn't run, didn't even look at her. His entire body was rigid, focused, his brown eyes fixed on something beyond the smoking vehicles. Not at the bodies being covered with sheets. Not at the chaos of emergency lights and shouting responders. At something else. Something in the trees. Sarah followed his gaze and saw only forest. Dense brush. Nothing remarkable. The dog whined once, sharp and urgent, and refused to move. And Sarah realized he wasn't mourning. He was trying to tell them something. The dog had been sitting there for 6 hours. Every rescuer assumed he was waiting for his dead owner. None of them thought to ask what he was waiting for. Sarah Chen had spent 2 years avoiding Highway 17. She'd transferred stations, changed her route to work, even moved to a different part of the city. Anything to not drive past mile marker 47 where her husband's car had wrapped around a guardrail and she'd been too late, too slow, too broken to save him. Now here she was, standing beside a fresh disaster on that exact stretch of road. The call had come in at 3:47 p.m. Multi-vehicle collision. Highway 17, multiple casualties. Sarah had frozen when the address came through the radio, her hands gripping the steering wheel of the ambulance until her knuckles went white. Jake, her partner, had looked at her with concern but said nothing. He knew. Everyone at the station knew about David, about mile marker 47, about why Sarah had requested a transfer 2 years ago. But they were the closest unit, and people were dying, so Sarah had driven. 3 cars destroyed. Metal twisted into shapes that defied physics. Shattered glass glittering across the asphalt like scattered diamonds. The acrid smell of burned rubber and leaking fluids. 2 bodies already covered with yellow tarps. Survivors being triaged by the first responders who'd beaten them to the scene. The fire department, 2 other ambulances, state troopers directing what little traffic was getting through. And 20 feet from the worst of the wreckage, sitting perfectly still, was a golden retriever. Sarah noticed him immediately because he was the only thing at the scene that wasn't moving. Everyone else was in controlled chaos, running, shouting, coordinating. But the dog sat motionless, his body rigid, his brown eyes fixed on something beyond the smoking vehicles. "Someone get that dog out of here," Fire Chief Morrison called, gesturing toward the animal, "before he gets hurt or interferes with the operation." A young firefighter approached, speaking in soothing tones, hands outstretched. The dog didn't even acknowledge him, didn't turn his head, just kept staring at the tree line on the far side of the road. Sarah grabbed her medical kit and headed toward the triage area where Jake was already assessing a woman with facial lacerations. She forced herself to focus on the work, to not look at mile marker 47 just 50 yards down the highway, to not remember David's blue sedan crumpled like a discarded soda can, to not hear his voice calling her name. Sarah. Jake's voice pulled her back. He was watching her with that careful expression he got when he was worried she might break. You don't have to be here. I can handle this. Morrison can call in another unit. I'm fine, she lied, kneeling beside the patient. Her hands moved through the familiar motions, checking vitals, applying pressure to wounds, speaking in calm tones. Mechanical. Competent. Empty. This was who she'd become. A paramedic who followed every protocol perfectly but felt nothing, who saved lives without caring about them, who survived each shift by refusing to let herself be in the moment. She was wrapping the woman's head wound when she heard the dog whine. Not a sound of pain or fear. Sharp. Urgent. Specific. Sarah's head turned automatically, and she found herself looking at the golden retriever. He was staring directly at her now, and when their eyes met, he barked once. Then his head swiveled back toward the trees, body tensing, tail straight out behind him. The young firefighter tried again to move him. Come on, boy. Let's get you somewhere safe. The dog refused to budge. His paws might as well have been nailed to the asphalt. Sarah stood slowly, medical training fading into the background as something older stirred in her chest. Instinct. The thing she'd killed 2 years ago when it had failed to save David. But it was whispering now, insistent. She walked toward the dog, ignoring Jake's questioning look. As she got closer, she could see the animal's posture more clearly. This wasn't shock, wasn't trauma or confusion. This was purpose. The dog's entire body was pointed toward the tree line like a compass needle finding north. When Sarah knelt beside him, the dog looked at her directly and barked once. Not in fear, but as if saying finally, someone's paying attention. Sarah followed his gaze and saw only forest. Dense brush. Nothing remarkable. The dog whined again, sharp and urgent, and refused to move. And Sarah realized he wasn't mourning. He was trying to tell them something. Sarah stood slowly, her eyes tracing the line from the dog's focused gaze to the tree line. Around her, the controlled chaos of the accident scene continued. Morrison barking orders, the hydraulic tools screaming as they cut into metal, survivors crying out in pain. But the dog sat motionless, a point of absolute stillness in the storm. Jake, she called over her shoulder. Come look at this. Her partner jogged over, medical kit bouncing against his hip. What VE you got? The dog. Watch him. Jake looked skeptical but humored her, crouching beside the golden retriever. The animal didn't acknowledge either of them. His brown eyes remained locked on the forest, his body tense with anticipation. Every few seconds, he'd let out a sharp bark directed at nothing they could see. He's traumatized, Jake said gently. Probably belonged to one of the victims. Dogs don't understand death. He's waiting for his owner to come back. But Sarah was shaking her head. She'd seen traumatized dogs before. Cowering, whimpering, pacing anxiously. This was different. The dog's posture reminded her of something, though it took her a moment to place it. Then it clicked. He looked like the search and rescue dog she'd worked with during training exercises. Alert. Focused. Working. She knelt again, closer this time, and examined the dog more carefully. He was well-groomed despite the dust and debris from the crash. No visible injuries. And around his neck, partially hidden by his thick fur, was a vest. She gently pulled the fur aside to see it better. The vest was dark blue with reflective strips and a patch that read, "Service dog, do not distract." He's a service dog, Sarah said, her pulse quickening. So, his handler probably died in the crash. That's why he won't leave. But Sarah's instincts, those instincts she'd buried for 2 years, were screaming now. Service dogs were trained for specific tasks. They didn't just sit and stare. They alerted. They indicated. They communicated. She placed her hand gently on the dog's head. "What are you trying to tell us, boy?" The dog turned to look at her for the first time, his tail giving a single deliberate wag. Then he barked once, sharp and commanding, and his head swiveled back toward the trees. Sarah stood and walked in the direction the dog was pointing. Jake followed, confused but willing. As they got closer to the road's edge, Sarah's eyes caught something the others had missed in the chaos. Fresh tire tracks in the gravel shoulder, leading toward the tree line. And beyond the brush, barely visible, broken branches and disturbed undergrowth. "Someone went off the road here," she said, her heart hammering. "Sarah, there are 3 vehicles accounted for. Witness statements match. There's no 4th car." But Sarah was already pushing through the brush, following the trail of destruction. Behind her, she heard the dog bark again. Not at her, but at Jake, as if saying finally, "Go with her." The tree line opened onto a steep embankment that dropped away sharply, obscured by dense foliage and the angle of the road. Sarah's breath caught. 20 feet down, nose down and held precariously by a thick pine tree, was a blue sedan. The driver's side was crumpled, the windshield shattered. And through the broken glass, she could see movement. A hand, small and pale, pressed against the rear window. "Jake, call it in. We've got another vehicle down the embankment." Behind them, the golden retriever barked 3 times in rapid succession, urgent, insistent, and his tail began to wag. Sarah didn't wait for backup. She grabbed the rope from Jake's emergency kit and secured it to a tree, testing her weight against it before starting her descent. The embankment was steep, the ground loose and treacherous. Every step sent small avalanches of dirt and gravel sliding down ahead of her. "Sarah, wait for the fire department." Jake called from above. "We don't know if it's stable." But that hand was still pressed against the window. Small, child-sized. And Sarah had already wasted 2 years being cautious, being afraid, following protocol while her instincts screamed to act. Not this time. She half slid, half climbed down the embankment, using tree roots and exposed rocks for handholds. The smell hit her when she was 10 feet from the car. Gasoline, sharp and overwhelming. The sedan's fuel tank had ruptured, and liquid was pooling beneath the vehicle, dripping down the slope. They had minutes, maybe less. Sarah reached the car and peered through the shattered driver's side window. A woman, late 20s, slumped against the deflated airbag. Blood matted her dark hair and ran down her face, but her chest was moving. Alive. Barely. In the back seat, strapped into a booster seat, was a little girl. 4, maybe 5 years old. Dark curls, a Disney princess t-shirt, eyes closed. Her small hand had fallen away from the window now, lying limp in her lap. "I've got 2 victims." Sarah shouted up to Jake. Adult female, head trauma, unconscious. Pediatric patient, unresponsive. Vehicles leaking fuel. "We need fire suppression and extraction equipment now." Above, she could hear Jake relaying the information, his voice tight with controlled panic. She could hear the dog too, barking continuously now, a sound of both urgency and triumph. He'd done his job. He'd gotten someone to follow. Sarah pulled on her gloves and carefully reached through the broken window to check the woman's pulse. Thready but present. She was breathing, but the pattern was irregular. Possible internal injuries. Definite concussion at minimum. The woman's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy. "Ma'am, can you hear me? I'm Sarah. I'm a paramedic. You've been in an accident. Try not to move." The woman's lips moved. Barely a whisper. "Emma. Your daughter. She's here. I'm going to help both of you. Can you tell me your name?" "Julia. Julia Martinez." Her eyes tried to focus on Sarah's face. "Emma. Is she?" "I'm checking on her right now. Stay still for me, Julia." Sarah moved to the rear door, trying the handle. Jammed. The impact had crumpled the frame. She circled to the other side, testing the opposite door. It opened with a scream of protesting metal, and she crawled into the back seat beside the little girl. Emma's pulse was weak. Her breathing shallow. No visible external injuries, but her legs were trapped where the front seat had been crushed backward in the impact. Sarah couldn't see how badly they were pinned without moving the seat, and moving anything in this unstable vehicle could send it sliding down the rest of the embankment. "Emma, honey, can you hear me?" Sarah said softly, checking the girl's pupils. Responsive but sluggish. Possible head injury. Definite shock. Above, she could hear the fire department arriving. Morrison's voice coordinating the response. Footsteps and equipment moving into position. But they'd need time to set up for a technical rescue on this terrain. Time they might not have. Julia's voice, stronger now, broke through Sarah's assessment. "Max." He ran up. "To get help." Sarah looked up sharply. "Max. The golden retriever. My service dog. PTSD." Julia coughed, and blood flecked her lips. "Not good. Trained. For emergencies. He was in the car with us. Must have climbed up to the road." Understanding crashed over Sarah like cold water. The dog hadn't been at the main wreck by accident. He'd been down here with Julia and Emma when the accident happened, and he'd climbed up that steep embankment through the brush to the crash site above, not because he was lost or traumatized, but because he'd been trained to get help. He'd sat there for 6 hours, waiting, indicating, trying to communicate that his people needed rescue. And everyone had assumed he was just a confused, grieving pet. Everyone except Sarah. "Max is still up there," Sarah told Julia. "He did exactly what he was supposed to do. He got us to you. Both of you. Now I need you to stay with me while we get you out, okay?" Julia's eyes filled with tears. "Emma. I'm going to get her out. I promise." It was a promise Sarah had no right to make. The car was unstable, leaking fuel, and Emma was trapped. But looking at this mother's terrified face, Sarah couldn't say anything else. She thought of David, of promises she'd made and couldn't keep, and pushed the memory away. Not now. Not here. Above, a face appeared at the edge of the embankment. Morrison assessing the scene. Chen. Status. 2 patients, both critical. Adult female, likely internal bleeding, head trauma. Pediatric patient trapped and unresponsive. Vehicles unstable and were sitting in a fuel spill. We need extraction equipment and fire suppression 5 minutes ago. We're setting up now. Can you stabilize them until we're ready? Sarah looked at the pooling gasoline, at the way the car creaked ominously against the tree holding it in place, at Emma's pale face and Julia's labored breathing. "I'll do what I can," she called back. "But we don't have much time." She turned back to her patients and began the delicate work of stabilization, every movement careful, every second precious. And above them, faithful and focused, Max's barking finally stopped. He'd done his part. Now it was Sarah's turn to finish what he'd started. Sarah's hands moved automatically, checking Julia's vitals, applying pressure to the worst of the visible wounds, trying to stabilize her without moving her too much. But her mind was somewhere else. 2 years ago. Same highway. Mile marker 47. The memories came in flashes, unbidden and brutal. David's blue sedan, crushed against the guardrail. The license plate she'd helped him install just 3 months earlier, hanging at an odd angle. The world tilting as she realized she was responding to her husband's accident. Jake grabbing her arm, trying to hold her back, but she was already running. David conscious, alive, trapped behind a steering wheel pushed backward into his chest. Blood on his shirt, his face, pooling in his lap. His eyes finding hers, relief and fear mixed together. Sarah, he'd said. Just her name. Like it was a prayer. I'm here. I've got you. You're going to be okay. Lies that tasted like ash. The fire department cutting through metal, working as fast as they could but not fast enough. David's hand in hers, his grip weakening with each passing minute. Sarah frozen, following protocol, doing everything by the book while her husband bled out in front of her. Sarah. His voice getting quieter. Sarah, I love you. Don't you dare say goodbye to me. Stay with me, David. Stay with me. But he hadn't. His hand had gone slack in hers. His eyes had emptied. And Sarah had been left standing there, a paramedic who couldn't save the one person who mattered most. Vitals dropping. Jake's voice from above snapped Sarah back to the present. Her hands were shaking. She looked down and realized she'd frozen, gauze held uselessly in midair, while Julia's breathing became more labored. Sarah. Jake's voice again, urgent. Talk to me. She forced herself to move, to press the gauze against Julia's head wound, to check the woman's pulse. Still present. Still fighting. But weakening. In the back seat, Emma's small chest rose and fell in shallow, irregular breaths. Sarah reached out to check her pulse again and her hand trembled so badly she had to try twice. She couldn't do this. Couldn't be here. Couldn't face another impossible rescue on the highway that had already taken everything from her. What if her instincts failed again? What if she made the wrong call? What if? Emma's vitals dropped. The monitor Jake had lowered down to her began beeping urgently. Sarah's vision blurred. Her chest tightened. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't. A bark. Sharp. Commanding. Cutting through the panic like a knife. Sarah's head jerked up. At the top of the embankment, silhouetted against the late afternoon sky, stood Max. The golden retriever's posture was rigid, focused. His bark not frantic but purposeful. Insistent. Focus. Their eyes met across the distance, and Sarah saw something in the dog's gaze that steadied her. He'd sat for 6 hours waiting for help. He hadn't given up. Hadn't panicked. He'd trusted that someone would eventually understand, and he'd been right. He'd done his job. Now Sarah needed to do hers. She took a deep breath, forcing the memories back. David was gone. She couldn't save him. But Julia and Emma were here, now alive, and they still had a chance. Sarah's hands stopped shaking. Her training kicked back in, overriding the fear. She stabilized Julia's neck, checked Emma's airway, began the methodical work of keeping them alive long enough for extraction. I'm okay, she called up to Jake. Proceeding with stabilization. How long on that equipment? 3 minutes. Hang tight. 3 minutes. Sarah could do 3 minutes. She'd done harder things. She'd survived David's death, survived 2 years of grief and guilt. She could survive 3 minutes. Above, Max barked once more, then settled into a sitting position, watching, waiting, trusting. Sarah worked, and for the first time in 2 years, she didn't let the ghost of her failure paralyze her. She let it fuel her instead. David had died on this highway, but Julia and Emma didn't have to. The fire department's technical rescue team descended the embankment with controlled efficiency, but Chief Morrison's face told Sarah everything she needed to know before he even spoke. This was bad. Worse than bad. Morrison crouched beside the vehicle, assessing the situation with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen too many accidents. The car was wedged at a 45-degree angle, held in place by a single pine tree that was already showing stress fractures in its trunk. The fuel leak had slowed but not stopped. And Emma, little Emma with her Disney princess shirt and dark curls, was pinned by the crushed front seat. "We need to stabilize the vehicle before we can attempt extraction," Morrison said, his voice low enough that Julia wouldn't hear. "That tree won't hold much longer. And with the fuel situation, we don't have time to wait for stabilization equipment," Sarah said. "Julia's bleeding internally. Emma's vitals are dropping. We have minutes, not hours. If we rush this and the car slides with personnel inside, they die anyway if we don't try." Morrison's jaw tightened. He looked at Julia, semi-conscious in the front seat, then at Emma in the back. The calculus of triage, cold and brutal. Save who you can save with the resources you have. We extract the adult first, he decided. She's accessible and critical. Once she's clear, we reassess for the child. Sarah's blood ran cold. Emma's trapped. If we move Julia and the weight shifts. "I know." Morrison's expression was grim. "But those are the options we have. We can guarantee one save or risk losing both." It was the right call. By the book. Exactly what Sarah would have recommended 2 years ago before she'd learned that doing everything right still meant watching people die. But looking at Emma's pale face, at her small chest rising and falling with each labored breath, Sarah couldn't accept it. There has to be another way. "Chen." Morrison's voice was gentle but firm. "You know there isn't. Not with what we have on scene. Specialized extrication equipment is 40 minutes out. These patients don't have 40 minutes." Jake had descended now, medical kit in hand. He caught Sarah's eye and she saw her own helplessness reflected there. He knew what she was thinking. Knew what this was costing her. "What do your instincts say, Sarah?" he asked quietly. The question hit her like a physical blow. Her instincts. The ones she'd stopped trusting after David. The ones that whispered now that there was a way, that she was missing something, that the answer was right in front of her if she'd just look. But what if she was wrong? What if her broken instincts led her to make the wrong call, cost both Julia and Emma their lives? "I don't trust my instincts," she said, the words bitter. "Maybe you should start." Sarah looked at him sharply. Jake had been her partner for 18 months. He'd seen her at her worst, pulled her through more bad calls than she could count, never pushed her to talk about David or the transfer or why she drove 20 minutes out of her way to avoid Highway 17. Now he was pushing. 2 years ago, your instincts were screaming at you to try something unconventional, Jake said. To break protocol. To take a risk. But you followed the rules instead, and David died anyway. Maybe the lesson isn't that your instincts were wrong. Maybe it's that sometimes the rules aren't enough. Or maybe my instincts would have killed him faster. You'll never know. But you know what protocol says now. Save Julia, leave Emma. Is that what your gut tells you to do? Sarah looked at Emma. At her small body trapped in twisted metal. At her chest rising and falling, each breath weaker than the last. Her instincts were screaming. Not to follow protocol. Not to make the safe choice. To find a third option. Sarah turned to Morrison. Give me 5 minutes with Emma before you move Julia. Let me see if there's a way to free her legs without destabilizing the vehicle. Chen. 5 minutes. If I can't do it, we go with your plan. But let me try. Morrison looked at the car, at his team, at the mathematics of rescue. Finally, he nodded. 5 minutes. Then we extract Julia regardless. Sarah didn't waste time acknowledging. She was already moving to the back seat, crawling in beside Emma, her mind racing through possibilities. The front seat was crushed backward, the frame bent, Emma's legs pinned beneath. Standard extraction would require cutting the seat, which would take time and risk destabilizing the vehicle. But David had been a volunteer firefighter before he'd gone into software engineering. He'd shown her tricks, unconventional techniques for situations exactly like this. Things that weren't in any manual. Sarah ran her hands along the seat frame, feeling for the release mechanisms. The electric controls were dead, crushed in the impact. But there were manual releases too, hidden failsafes designed for exactly this kind of emergency. She found the first one beneath the driver's seat, pulled hard. Nothing. Jammed. 4 minutes. The second release, passenger side. She had to contort herself around Emma's trapped legs to reach it, her shoulders screaming in protest. 3 minutes. Her fingers found the release lever, yanked. A click. The seat shifted half an inch. I need leverage, Sarah called. Something to pry with. Jake passed down a Halligan bar, a firefighter's tool, wedge on one end, fork on the other. Sarah wedged it into the gap she'd created, braced her weight, and pulled. The seat shifted another inch. Emma's left leg came free. 2 minutes. One more, Sarah breathed. She repositioned the bar, found a new angle, pulled with everything she had. Metal groaned. The tree holding the car creaked ominously. Chen, time's up. Morrison called. Almost. Got it. One final pull. The seat lurched backward, and Emma's right leg slipped free. Sarah didn't wait. She gathered the little girl in her arms, cradling her head, and crawled backward out of the vehicle just as the tree gave an ominous crack. Clear, she shouted. I'm clear with the patient. Hands reached down to take Emma, passing her up the embankment in a careful relay while Sarah scrambled after. Behind her, Morrison's team moved in to extract Julia, working with controlled urgency. Sarah emerged at the top of the embankment to find Max waiting. The dog's tail wagged once, his brown eyes meeting hers with something that looked like approval. She'd trusted her instincts, and this time they'd been right. While the fire department worked to extract Julia, Sarah and Jake loaded Emma into the ambulance, hooking her up to monitors, establishing in 4-line, doing everything they could to stabilize her for transport. The little girl's vitals were weak but holding. She'd make it to the hospital. She'd have a chance. Sarah's hands were steady now, the panic that had gripped her earlier burned away by adrenaline and purpose. She worked efficiently, checking Emma's pupils, assessing for internal injuries, speaking in soft tones even though the child was unconscious. You did good, kiddo. Your mom's going to be so proud of you. And Max. Max is a hero." At the mention of the dog's name, Sarah heard a bark from outside the ambulance. She looked out to see Max sitting beside the back doors, patient and alert. "Waiting. Someone get that dog contained before he gets in the way," one of the firefighters called. "No." Sarah's voice was sharp. "Leave him. He stays with his people." She climbed out of the ambulance and knelt beside Max, really looking at him for the first time. He was beautiful. Golden for slightly dusty from the embankment, intelligent eyes watching her calmly. Around his neck, the service dog vest was embroidered with a name. Max, and beneath it, PTSD service dog. Sarah gently felt along the vest and found a pocket containing documentation. She pulled it out, registration papers, medical information, and a laminated card with instructions. Max is a certified PTSD service dog trained for Julia Martinez. In case of emergency, Max is trained to alert during panic attacks or dissociative episodes, seek help if handler is unconscious or injured, provide deep pressure therapy, navigate to safe locations. If you are reading this, Julia needs medical assistance. Max will lead you to her. Sarah's throat tightened. The dog had followed his training perfectly. When the accident happened and Julia couldn't respond, Max had assessed the situation, climbed up the embankment, no small feat for a dog his size, and positioned himself where rescuers would find him. Then he'd waited, indicating, trying to communicate until someone finally understood. 6 hours. He'd sat there for 6 hours. She read further in Julia's medical file. Widow. Husband. Carlos Martinez, firefighter, killed in the line of duty 1 year ago. Max had been prescribed as part of Julia's therapy for severe PTSD and survivor's guilt. Survivor's guilt. Sarah knew that particular hell intimately. She looked at Max with new understanding. This dog had been trained to save the person his owner couldn't save, herself. When Carlos died, Julia had fallen apart, and Max had been there to pull her back from the edge. He was her anchor, her alarm system, her connection to the world when grief threatened to swallow her whole. And today he'd saved her life. "You succeeded where I failed," Sarah whispered to the dog. She thought of David, of the years she'd spent drowning in guilt because she hadn't been able to save him. "You kept your person alive." Max tilted his head, watching her with those knowing brown eyes. Then he did something unexpected. He stood, walked over to Sarah, and leaned his full weight against her legs. It was a service dog behavior. Deep pressure therapy, designed to ground someone who was dissociating or panicking. Sarah's eyes burned. She placed her hand on Max's head, feeling the solid warmth of him, and let herself take a full breath for the first time in hours. "Chen." Morrison's voice. "We've got Martinez coming up. She's stable enough for transport, but we need to move now." Sarah stood, and Max immediately moved to her side, matching her pace as she returned to the embankment edge. They were bringing Julia up on a backboard, Morrison and another firefighter controlling the ascent. Julia's eyes were open, searching frantically despite the neck brace. "Emma," she gasped as they reached level ground. "Where's?" "She's in the ambulance stable," Sarah said quickly, moving to Julia's side. "You're both going to the hospital. You're both going to be okay." Julia's eyes filled with tears. "Max." As if summoned, the golden retriever appeared at the head of the stretcher, his nose nearly touching Julia's face. His tail wagged gently. "Good boy," Julia breathed. "Such a good boy." They loaded her into a second ambulance, and Sarah made a decision. "Max rides with Emma," she told the other paramedics. "He's a service dog. He stays with his family." No one argued. Max jumped into the ambulance with Emma, settling himself on the floor beside the gurney where he could keep watch over the little girl. His job wasn't done yet. Sarah climbed in after him, Jake taking the driver's seat. As they pulled away from the accident scene, lights flashing and sirens wailing, Sarah looked out the back window. Highway 17 stretched behind them, mile marker 47 visible in the distance. She'd faced it, survived it, and for the first time in 2 years, she'd trusted herself enough to save someone when it mattered. Maybe, just maybe, that meant she could learn to save herself too. The hospital was 10 minutes away. Emma's vitals held steady, and Sarah allowed herself a moment to breathe, to believe they'd actually pulled it off. Max lay calm and focused beside Emma's gurney, his presence a stabilizing force even in the chaos of the moving ambulance. Then Sarah's radio crackled. Morrison's voice, urgent. "All units, be advised, vehicle at scene has become unstable. We're evacuating." The transmission cut off in a burst of static. Sarah's blood ran cold. "Jake, turn around. Now." "Sarah, we have a critical patient." "Julia's still there. If that car goes, the extraction team, turn around." Jake cursed but hit the brakes, executing a tight U-turn that sent equipment sliding. They raced back toward the scene, and Sarah could see smoke rising before they even arrived. The embankment had partially collapsed. The blue sedan that had been held by the pine tree was now sliding, slowly but inevitably, down the slope. And Morrison's team was scrambling to get clear, dragging equipment, shouting warnings. But there was someone still down there. Sarah grabbed the binoculars from the dashboard and her stomach dropped. A firefighter, young, couldn't be more than 25, had been securing the last of the extraction equipment when the slide started. He'd been thrown off balance, twisted his ankle, and now he was trying to crawl up the embankment while the car slid toward him, gaining momentum. If the car hit him, it would take him all the way down the 50-foot drop to the bottom of the ravine where the fuel would ignite on impact. Requesting immediate assistance. Morrison's voice over the radio. Firefighter down on the embankment, vehicle sliding. Sarah was already moving. She threw open the ambulance doors, grabbed her medical kit and a rope. "Sarah, no." Jake grabbed her arm. "You can't go down there. That kid's going to die. We have a patient. Emma needs." "Emma's stable. That firefighter has seconds." She yanked her arm free. "Stay with Emma. Keep her vitals up. I'll be back." She didn't wait for his response. Didn't let herself think about protocol or safety or the fact that she was about to do exactly what she'd been afraid to do for 2 years. Trust her instincts over the rules. Sarah sprinted to the embankment edge. The young firefighter was 30 feet down, dragging himself upward with his hands, his injured ankle useless. The car was 20 feet above him, picking up speed as the loose soil gave way beneath it. 10 seconds. Maybe less. Sarah secured the rope and rappelled down, moving faster than was safe, rocks and dirt spraying around her. She reached the firefighter just as the car's bumper drew level with them. "Grab on," she shouted, hooking her arm around his chest. He was heavier than she'd expected, dead weight with his injury. Sarah pulled, using the rope for leverage, hauling them both sideways out of the car's path. The vehicle's fender missed them by inches, so close Sarah felt the displaced air. But they weren't clear yet. The sliding car had destabilized more of the embankment. The ground beneath them was crumbling, turning to liquid as the soil gave way. "Climb!" Sarah yelled. "Use me as a brace." The firefighter grabbed the rope, pulling himself upward with Sarah pushing from below. Above, other firefighters were reaching down, adding their strength. They hauled the injured man up and over the edge. Sarah started to follow, but the ground beneath her feet disappeared entirely. She fell, fingers scrabbling for purchase, and caught the rope just as she dropped. The jolt nearly tore her arms from their sockets. She dangled there 25 feet up, the embankment crumbling around her, the car sliding past beneath her feet. "Sarah!" Jake's voice, terrified. "Grab the rope with both hands." She did, hand over hand, pulling herself up while her muscles screamed in protest. Hands reached down, grabbed her arms, her vest, hauling her over the edge. She collapsed on solid ground, gasping, covered in dirt and scrapes. Below, the blue sedan reached the bottom of the ravine. The impact was tremendous, metal crumpling, glass shattering. And then, exactly as Morrison had feared, the fuel ignited. The fireball rose into the evening sky, black smoke billowing. If the little girl had still been in that car, if Sarah hadn't trusted her instincts to try the unconventional extraction, she didn't let herself finish the thought. Morrison appeared, helping her to her feet. "You just saved firefighter Colin's life." He should have sounded grateful, but his voice was tight with anger. "You also violated every safety protocol we have. You could have been killed. But I wasn't." Sarah's voice was steady despite her shaking hands. "And Collins is alive. This time. What about next time when the instinct is wrong? Then I'll live with it. But I won't live with not trying." Morrison stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You've changed, Chen. 2 years ago you would have followed protocol and watched him die. 2 years ago I did follow protocol and watched someone die." Sarah looked at the burning wreckage. "I'm done following rules that cost lives." She turned and walked back to the ambulance where Emma waited, Max's concerned eyes watching from the back. The dog had witnessed everything, and something in his steady gaze told Sarah he approved. She'd trusted herself. She'd taken the risk. And everyone had survived. For the first time in 2 years, Sarah felt like a paramedic again. Not broken. Not afraid. Alive. The hospital descended into controlled chaos when both ambulances arrived. Emma and Julia were rushed into separate trauma bays, teams of doctors and nurses swarming them. Sarah gave her report on Emma, vitals, injuries, extraction details. Her voice steady and professional despite her scraped hands and dirt-covered uniform. "Good work, Chen," the attending physician said, barely looking up from his assessment. "This kid's lucky you found her when you did." Lucky? Sarah didn't feel lucky. She felt wrung out, exhausted, like she'd run a marathon with her soul instead of her body. But Emma was alive, and that was what mattered. Jake appeared beside her, his expression somewhere between relief and fury. "Don't ever do that to me again." "Do what?" "Run toward danger like you've got nothing to lose. You could have died on that embankment. So could Collins. He's a firefighter. It's literally his job to take those risks. You're a paramedic. Your job is to save people who are already safe to reach." "Since when?" Sarah challenged. "We go into burning buildings. We work active shooter scenes. We climb down embankments to reach patients. Risk is part of the job. Calculated risk. What you did today was trust my instincts for the first time in 2 years." Sarah's voice softened. "I know it scared you. It scared me too. But Jake, I can't keep living afraid that I'll make the wrong call. Sometimes you have to try, even when the outcome's uncertain. Jake studied her face, then sighed. You're different. Since the accident today. Since the dog. Maybe. Sarah looked toward the trauma bay where they were working on Emma. Or maybe I'm finally becoming who I used to be. Before David. Before I convinced myself I was too broken to trust myself. Before Jake could respond, a doctor emerged from Julia's trauma bay. Family of Julia Martinez? Sarah stepped forward. I'm the paramedic who brought her in. She doesn't have family here. Just her daughter and her service dog. The doctor nodded. She's stable. We're taking her to surgery for internal bleeding, but she's going to make it. Someone want to tell me about this service dog? He's causing quite a scene in the waiting room. Sarah couldn't help but smile. His name is Max. He's a PTSD service dog, trained to stay with his handler during medical emergencies. He probably needs to see her before surgery, just for a few minutes. That's highly irregular. Doctor, that dog climbed an embankment, sat for 6 hours, and led us to 2 people who would have died if he hadn't. The least we can do is let him do his job. Something in Sarah's tone must have convinced him. 10 minutes later, Max was in Julia's pre-op room, his head resting gently on the bed beside her bandaged hand. Julia's eyes were heavy with pain medication, but she managed to smile. Hey, buddy, she whispered. You did so good. Max's tail wagged once, slowly, as if he understood. Julia's gaze found Sarah, standing in the doorway. You're the one who found us. The paramedic. Sarah Chen. Max liked you. He doesn't usually trust people that easily. Julia's words were slurring as the medication took hold. He has good instincts. So do you. Training him to get help. That saved your life. Saved Emma's life. My husband trained him. Before. Julia's eyes filled with tears. Before the fire. Carlo said every dog should know how to save their person. Guess he was right. Sarah's chest tightened. Your husband was a firefighter. Carlos Martinez. You knew him. No. But I. Sarah moved closer, the words coming before she could stop them. I lost my husband too. 2 years ago. On this same highway. Julia's hand reached out, finding Sarah's. Then you understand. Yes. The guilt. The what-ifs. The feeling like you should have saved them somehow. Every day, Sarah admitted. Every single day. Julia squeezed her hand weakly. My therapist says we can't save everyone, but we can honor them by saving who we can. Max gets that. That's why he's so good at his job. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. We can honor them by saving who we can. She thought of David, of 2 years spent drowning in guilt. Of every life she'd saved since his death feeling hollow because it wasn't his life. Of convincing herself she was broken because she couldn't prevent one death, even as she prevented dozens of others. Maybe the lesson wasn't that she'd failed David. Maybe it was that she could honor him by continuing to fight for the people she could still reach. Thank you, Sarah whispered, for saying that. Julia was fading now, the medication pulling her under. Emma. She's safe. She's going to recover. You both are. Tell her. Tell her Mama's okay. And Max. I'll make sure Max gets to see both of you after surgery. I promise. Julia's eyes closed, her breathing evening out. Max remained at her side, steady and calm, his job complete but his vigil continuing. Sarah stepped out of the room and found Jake waiting with news. Emma's awake. She's asking for her mom and someone named Max. I'll take him. Sarah collected Max from Julia's room and led him to pediatrics, where Emma lay in a bed that looked too big for her small body. Her legs were bandaged, her arm in a sling, but her eyes were open and alert. When she saw Max, her face lit up. Maxie! The dog's entire body wagged as he moved to her bedside. Emma buried her face in his fur, crying softly, and Max stood perfectly still, providing the deep pressure therapy he'd been trained for. "You're a very brave girl," Sarah said softly. "And Max is a very good dog." "He saved us," Emma said, her voice muffled against Max's fur. "Mama was sleeping and wouldn't wake up, and I was stuck. But Max got help. He's the bestest dog in the whole world." "Yes, he is." Emma looked up at Sarah with eyes too old for her young face. "Are you the one who helped Max? He wouldn't leave until someone came. I'm the one who finally listened to what he was trying to say. Thank you for listening." Sarah's vision blurred with tears. "You're welcome, sweetheart. Your mom's going to be okay. She's in surgery now, but she's going to be fine." Emma nodded, already drifting back toward sleep, her hand tangled in Max's fur. Sarah stood there for a long moment, watching the little girl and the dog who'd refused to give up on her, and felt something shift in her chest. Not healing, not yet, but the beginning of it. The first crack in the wall she'd built around her heart 2 years ago. She'd faced Highway 17. She'd trusted her instincts. She'd saved 2 lives that would have been lost if she'd been too afraid to try. And for the first time since David's death, Sarah felt like maybe, just maybe, she deserved to be called a paramedic again. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood in the hospital parking lot, waiting. Julia and Emma were being discharged today, and Sarah had promised to be there. It wasn't part of her job, but some things mattered more than job descriptions. The automatic doors slid open and Emma emerged in a wheelchair pushed by a nurse, Julia walking slowly beside her. Both were healing, physically at least. Emma's legs were in casts covered with colorful signatures from nurses and doctors. Julia moved carefully, still tender from surgery, but the color had returned to her face. And beside them, tail wagging, walked Max. Emma saw Sarah first. "It's the lady who helped Max." Sarah knelt down so she was at eye level with the wheelchair. "How are you feeling, kiddo?" "Better. Look, the doctor signed my cast." Emma pointed to a sprawling signature. "And Max has been sleeping in my room every night. The nurses said it was medicinally necessary." She pronounced the words carefully, clearly repeating what she'd been told. "Very medicinally necessary," Sarah agreed, scratching Max behind the ears. The dog leaned into her touch, and she felt that same sense of calm she'd felt at the accident scene. Julia approached more slowly, leaning on a cane. "Thank you for coming." "Of course." Sarah stood. "How are you really?" "Alive. Thanks to you." Julia's eyes were serious. "The doctor said another hour and we both would have bled out. If you hadn't followed Max, if you hadn't trusted what he was trying to tell you." "He's the hero. I just finally listened." Still, Julia was quiet for a moment. "I wanted to thank you. And to ask you something. Would you like to come with us somewhere? There's a place I visit sometimes. I think you might need to see it too." Sarah understood immediately what Julia meant. Mile marker 47. Julia nodded. Max has good instincts about who needs help. And I think you still need some. I know I do. 20 minutes later, Sarah's car pulled onto the shoulder of Highway 17, right at mile marker 47. She'd driven past this spot 100 times in the past 2 years, always with her eyes straight ahead, knuckles white on the steering wheel, holding her breath until it was behind her. Now she got out of the car and stood looking at the guardrail. It had been replaced after David's accident, shiny and new where the old one had been crushed. But Sarah could still see it in her mind, the blue sedan wrapped around it, David trapped inside, her own helplessness. Julia's car pulled up behind hers. Emma was sleeping in the back seat, worn out from the hospital discharge, but Max jumped out immediately, moving to stand beside Sarah. He leaned his weight against her leg, that same grounding pressure he'd provided in the hospital. Carlos died on a Tuesday, Julia said, coming to stand on Sarah's other side. Structure fire. He went in to get a child out and the floor collapsed. They told me he died instantly, that he didn't suffer. I still don't know if I believe them. David died on a Wednesday, Sarah said. Car accident. Right here. I was the responding paramedic. I held his hand while he bled out, and I couldn't do anything to save him. They stood in silence for a moment, 2 widows at a roadside memorial, a service dog between them. I blamed myself for a year, Julia continued. Told myself I should have convinced Carlos to quit firefighting. Should have been a better wife so he'd have something to live for besides the job. Should have. I blamed myself for 2 years, Sarah admitted. Told myself I should have tried something unconventional. Should have been a better paramedic. Should have saved him even though there was no way to save him. My therapist said something that helped. She said we can't save everyone, but we can honor the ones we lost by saving who we can. Max gets that. Julia smiled down at the dog. That's why he's so good at his job. He knows Carlos trained him to protect me because Carlos couldn't anymore. Every time Max helps me through a panic attack, every time he gets me help when I need it, he's honoring Carlos. Sarah felt tears on her cheeks but didn't wipe them away. I've saved dozens of lives since David died, but none of them felt like it mattered because they weren't his life. Maybe that's not the lesson, though. Julia turned to look at her. Maybe the lesson is that every life matters, including yours. David wouldn't want you spending 2 years punishing yourself for being human. How do you know what David would want? Because Carlos wouldn't want that for me. And I'm guessing our husbands were similar. Brave, protective, dedicated to helping people. They died doing what they thought was right. The least we can do is live the same way. Sarah looked at the guardrail at the spot where David had taken his last breath, and for the first time she let herself really see it. Not as the place where she'd failed, but as the place where David had been loved in his final moments. Where she'd held him, told him she loved him, refused to leave him alone. She hadn't saved him, but she'd been there. That mattered. David used to say that fear and courage weren't opposites, Sarah said softly. He said courage was being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. Sounds like a smart man. He was. And he'd be furious if he knew I'd spent 2 years being too afraid to trust myself. Sarah took a deep breath. I'm done being afraid. She turned to Max, kneeling so she was at his level. Thank you. For making me listen. For reminding me what it means to trust your instincts, even when you're scared. Max's tail wagged, and he licked her cheek, a gesture of affection and approval. Julia smiled. Max doesn't usually do that. He really likes you. The feeling's mutual. Sarah stood, feeling lighter than she had in years. I've been thinking about something. About service dog programs for first responders. Dogs like Max, trained to help people with PTSD, to recognize when we're spiraling, to help us through the hard calls. That's a great idea. I think I'm going to try to start one. At my station. Maybe expand it to others. It's what David would have done. Found a way to turn tragedy into something that helps people. Carlos would approve too. He always said the best way to honor the dead is to help the living. Sarah looked at mile marker 47-1 last time. David had died here. That was a fact she couldn't change. But she could change what it meant. Not a monument to failure, but a reminder of why the work mattered. Why trusting herself mattered. Why showing up, even when afraid, was the bravest thing she could do. "Goodbye, David," she said softly. "I love you. And I'm going to keep fighting. Keep saving lives. Keep trusting myself. For you. And for me." The wind picked up, rustling the trees along the highway, and Sarah let herself believe it was David answering. Approving. Letting her go. She got back in her car. Julia and Max returned to theirs. And Sarah pulled onto Highway 17, driving past mile marker 47 without flinching, without holding her breath, without looking away. 2 months later, Sarah responded to another call. Another accident. Another chance to save someone. When she arrived on scene, her hands were steady. Her instincts were clear. And when the moment came to choose between protocol and bold action, she trusted herself. The patient survived. Sarah returned to the station that evening to find Max waiting by the ambulance bay. Julia had started bringing him by once a week, part of a new program Sarah had proposed to the chief. Service dogs for first responders. Support for those carrying trauma. A way to help the helpers. "Hey, buddy," Sarah said, kneeling to scratch his ears. "Good to see you." Max's tail wagged, and Sarah realized something. She was smiling. Really smiling for the first time in years. Grief didn't end. But it could coexist with purpose. With hope. With the courage to keep showing up. Max had taught her that. Had taught her the difference between waiting for death and waiting for someone to see what you're pointing at. Sometimes all we need is someone who refuses to look away. Sarah had looked away for 2 years. From Highway 17, from her own capability, from the possibility of trusting herself again. She wasn't looking away anymore. And that made all the difference. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.